What is up, everybody? Today we have snow in Amsterdam. It's snowing, everything is white, and it has nothing to do with what I'm teaching you today. Today we are talking about bass. Not your typical Psytrance bass, we're gonna leave that for another video, but the glide sub bass. The glide bass is something that is used somewhat sparingly in Psytrance tracks, but it is super important and powerful when it does show up. Now, because this bass focuses on frequencies that are mostly below 100 Hz, it is very important to keep it very tight and not have it get in the way of your all-powerful kick drum. And over the years, I have seen tons of producers run straight into sample packs to grab that glide bass sound. And that's okay, that's fine, but you know what's even better? Doing it yourself so that you have absolute control over it and make it fit perfectly with your kick. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Alright guys, so let's start. Here I have your normal kick and bass line. I have some MIDI already written out for the glide bass. Now let's listen to the rolling kick and bass pattern first. You notice these gaps where the bass is not playing, and these gaps are going to be filled with our glide bass. Let's listen to the whole thing with the glide bass on. Awesome, so let's learn how to do this. We're obviously going to use Serum, as you can see here. So let's go ahead and initialize preset. Serum always starts the preset with one oscillator on a sawtooth, and we're actually still going to use only sawtooth wavetables, but we're going to use both oscillators. So the second oscillator is going to be one octave up. Now what's going to happen is that the first oscillator is going to be our meat, our sub. So it is only going to have one voice of unison, and it's going to have its random at 0 so that the phase is consistent always. And the second oscillator is going to have 4 voices of unison so that we have some spread in the stereo field and some detune going on. But the detune, we're going to bring that down to 0.12 so that it's not too detuned. It's going to sound a little weird if we do that. Now first things first. The glide bass needs to contour the kick, which means that when the kick is still playing and the sub of the kick is still at full power, this glide bass cannot be playing in a loud volume so that it doesn't get in the way. Otherwise, it's going to distort, it's going to get in the way, it's going to sound muddy, it's going to be terrible. And if you look at it here, our kick finishes precisely on the 8th note mark. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set the envelope to an 8th note. So now it is only going to be at full volume after this 8th note has passed, and then it contours the kick perfectly. We're going to press this lock icon here so that we have a better view, and we're going to bring this down just a little bit so that it contours a bit more. So now let's solo it and listen to how it sounds right now. Okay, you can hear that the level goes up following this envelope shape, which is good. So now we have the contour of the kick. But now we need to cut the high frequencies so that we have a focus on the sub. So we're going to turn on the filter section, have it affect both oscillators, and we're going to go quite extreme here. We're going to use the low filter 24 band per octave. The resonance is going to be all the way down to 0, and we're going to assign envelope number 2 to it. Now you see that it's going bipolarly. And what do we do when this happens? Well, we want it to go only one direction. So I'm going to press Alt-Shift, and then I'm going to click on it again. There you go. Now it's only going one direction. We're going to bring this down, and we're going to move the point of cutoff to about 60 Hertz so that we only have the sub. And now this filter cutoff is going to go up, let's say about 30, but we got to listen to it. Let's listen to it now. Okay, great. So before we go any further, let's assign some velocity mapping to both oscillators. We're going to bring them both down to 0. Oscillator number 1 is going to go up to 75. And we're going to have the oscillator 2, which is one octave above, go a little lower. So let's bring it up to 50. I don't want this upper octave to be so present. We still got to focus on the low end. So now this is going to be velocity sensitive, which is great because as you see in this MIDI over here, I have the first note on this little pattern that I'm going to show later be a little bit lower. Now let's shape this second envelope over here. We're going to leave the attack at a quarter note. And now we're going to bring this down a little bit, and let's hear how it sounds now. Great. you may have noticed that it's not gliding enough. And as a general note, you want your glide basses to glide across at least a perfect fifth or a full octave. For this example, we're going to go a full octave. Now, there are many ways to approach this. Some people like to glide the bass using an LFO and assign it to the coarse tuning so that you don't need to write any automation to glide your bass. And that is fine. However, I do prefer to have more control over how the glide is going to behave in certain situations so that I don't have to create different glide basses for different kind of phrases or lengths of glide that I want. Now, let's say you use the LFO. So the LFO is going to behave like this. Perfect quarter note. So across a quarter note is going to go from one octave above, for example, to the octave below. Now, what if I have a phrase like over here where I want to have one standard Psytrance bass note hit at the very last 16th of the beat, but I still want to have my glide bass hit that lower octave before that last 16th of the beat? Well, if I have it on my pitch bend, I have more control over that. So as you can see on the automation over here, if we go to pitch bend, I can actually automate that. And then it can actually hit the lower octave before the 1/4 note mark, which would be fixed if we assign this to the LFO. So in my opinion, it's a lot better to have the glide be assigned to the pitch bend, and then you can actually write the glide yourself and do all sorts of crazy things with it. Another thing you might have noticed is that now my glide bass can actually glide up as well and not just down. If I have it assigned to the LFO, for example, now the shape of the glide bass is only going to go down to the lower octave and not up. So my suggestion is assign it to the pitch bend and do it yourself. Okay, so let's listen to how it sounds now. And there you go. Now it's starting to take real shape. Let's listen to the phrase over here where it glides up and down. Cool, right? Let's listen to it in the full context of the groove. Perfect. Now this is a very solid sound by itself, but you can always add a little bit more. And what is very typical in Psytrance is to have these glide basses have a little bit of bit crushing in it. And the bit crushing distortion that we can use inside of Serum is called a downsample. This is going to leave some digital distortion that comes from downsampling the sound. So let's set this to 20% and let's listen to how it sounds now. You can hear the little bit of high information there, which comes from the downsampling process. So I want to bring the volume up a little bit, so I'm going to crank up this drive just about 10% here. And also, I want the sound to be a little bit more consistent in terms of dynamics. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a compressor over here and have some gain reduction happen, and then crank up the gain a little bit so that the beginning of the sound is a little bit louder, and when the sound fully opens up, it is a little bit lower. So we're going to grab the threshold, bring it down to about 21 dB. We're going to bring that attack down all the way. Release can stay in 90 milliseconds. And now let's listen to it now. Great. You can notice that it does a little bit of compression. Now let's compensate the gain a little bit. Let's say by 3 dB. Fantastic. Now let's listen to the whole thing again now. Great. So this is the preset that you listened to in the beginning of the video. This is the sound that I created, and this is going to be the preset that I'm going to send to you guys. Now, I'm going to give you some alternatives on how you can make it different and add your own flavor to it. One of the possibilities is to change the wavetable of the oscillator that is one octave above, because that one is the oscillator that gives you a little bit of stereo width, and it's also the oscillator that brings the flavor to the sound. So one thing that's common in Psytrance is to actually use a square wave on the one that's one octave above. So let's do that. We go here, analog, basic shapes, and we move it to a square wave. Let's listen to how it sounds like that. slightly different sound, has a different flavor. But you can make this different flavor speak out a little bit more by opening up the cutoff a little bit so that you can hear more of that square sound when the filter opens up. Let's listen to it in the context of the groove. And you can always add more complex wavetables. Let's go to spectral and add like a monster. The lesson here is don't be afraid to experiment, guys, especially on the oscillator that is one octave above. Be careful with the oscillator A because this is the meat of the sound. This is what it's going to create, that sub power. Also, don't be afraid to experiment in the effects section. You can always add a phaser and see how this sounds. Let's try it out. Feed down to 50%, depth all the way down, and then the rate down. And let's sweep through the frequencies. It adds a nice flavor to the sound as well. Now this is always going to depend on the sound that you want, on the track that you have, and also its relationship to the kick and the main bass. So that's it, guys. I'm going to leave the preset for free so you can download it in the comments section, but I highly encourage you to try it out yourself so that you can have total control over it and make the sound your own. This type of bass will always have slight changes from track to track depending on its relationship with the kick drum. So get in there and find out what works best for you and your track. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought of this tutorial, and you can also tell me what you would like to see next, as I'm always open to suggestions. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, follow me on social media, listen to my music, and all of that jazz. Cheers! See you on the next one.